Hello, internet friends. This is Siren Lush from Siren Song Tarot, and today I thought it would be fun to take you along the journey of me edging these decks that I have here. In addition to reading the tarot, I also like to spend some time modifying my decks because it helps me build a connection with them. It helps me finish them off and to create an aesthetic overall look that makes me want to reach for them and use them more and make them really feel like they're mine. So what is edging, you may ask? Edging is when you have a deck who has an unfinished edge in between the card back and the card face, and it is just kind of white or gray of the cardstock when you have the deck all together. And especially in a deck like this is the Zombie Tarot, or excuse me, Tarot Z, where it's got a fairly saturated, full bleed, dark back, and, well, not these two cards, but mostly saturated, dark imagery on the faces. It can really stand out when you're turning that deck to the side. So edging or adding a color there really finishes off the deck and, in my opinion, makes it look more professional. You can get decks that are already edged, like this deck here. This is the True Black Tarot. This is a deck that is actually edged by the creator. It's an indie deck, and I am fairly certain that the time and attention that is put into edging every single one of these decks by the creator is factored into the price point, because this guy is quite pricey. Gorgeous, but pricey. And you can see how a deck like this, where black is the main color of this deck, you know, this is the only card in the whole deck that has lightness that's all the way out to the border, but you can see how this deck wouldn't quite look as slick and sleek if the white of the middle part of the cardstock was showing through when you turned it on either side. You can also buy decks that have been gilded, and gilding is this lovely, shiny, metallic, finished edge. This is the Marielle Tarot. And gilding is something where it's super shiny and metallic like this that is difficult to do on your own. So there are a few decks that have this pre-done. It's quite a production process. A lot of these cards end up sticking together, and you have to kind of carefully peel them apart when you first get the deck. And the thing about gilding that is rather unfortunate, it actually happens with all edging, is that with use, you can see here when it's not shining in the light, the gilding will start to rub off, and you'll get these light spots. So with the Marielle specifically, I'm not a huge fan of these big old black borders that are around all of the art, but I love the gilding on these cards. So after I've used them enough and the gilding gets beat up enough, I will probably free these cards of their borders and re-edge it myself. So that'll be a project for another day. So an example of a deck that I have done was I actually started with this deck earlier, and as I was doing this, I figured that it might be fun to bring you along my little edging binge. So this is the Magic of You Oracle, and I have edged it in this lovely forest green, and it actually matches the box pretty well. And there is this cool green tone throughout pretty much all of the cards. It's on the back, it's down here, it's in a lot of the faces, and I think that this really polishes and finishes off this deck in a nice way. This is one of my favorite oracles. I primarily use it for myself. And I think the green is absolutely stunning. It's a stunning complement to the rest of this deck, which did have very stark white edges that drove me bananas. So, what am I using to edge these decks? I am using alcohol markers, alcohol-based ink markers or illustration markers. These ones are art alternatives. I got these at the craft store. Alcohol markers are something that a lot of illustrators use because they're very pigmented and they dry really quickly, and they can be blendable with a blending marker. They're fairly cheap too. These are $4 a piece, and if you go to Joann's like I did, you can be a coupon queen as well and get them for $2 or less if you if you go in with some coupons and you know exactly what you're wanting to get. But other brands, more well-known brands of alcohol markers would be Prismacolor and Copic. Now, I like alcohol markers because they may bleed through cardstock that is more fibrous, like linen cardstock, which is very fibery, and the alcohol will saturate through each of those fibers, and you'll get kind of this fuzzy edge bleeding effect. But I have found that alcohol markers, they dry quickly, they're very pigmented, and they don't rub off on my hands. Other things that people like to use to edge decks are Sharpies. Most people use the fatter chisel tip Sharpies if they're going to use them. I do not like Sharpies because if there is any moisture on my hands, if it's a humid day, if my hands are slightly damp, if I have any kind of residue of lotion on them, the Sharpie will rub off on my fingers and I will have this sooty gray palm from shuffling my card. Another popular alternative for edging are Crayola markers or water-based markers, and you have a much larger variety of color and tone in water-based markers like these than you do with the alcohol markers. However, you run into the same kind of problem with the water-based markers where if there's moisture on your hands, the pigment will begin to rub off. And I find that whenever I've used these types of markers, I have had to retouch the edging much more often, as in every 2 weeks. Whereas with the alcohol marker, depending on how often I use the deck, I can go months and months and months and months before it begins to wear off and looks like it needs a little bit of touch up. Something else that can be used that's fairly popular to edge decks are metallic markers. It can be a metallic Sharpie, it can be a gold paint pen like this guy. I personally don't like the effect of the metallic markers. I prefer the shiny gold or silver gilding that actually looks metallic to me. These kinds of markers end up looking more sparkly than metallic, and that's why I tend to shy away from them. It's just a personal preference. Decks can also be edged with ink, like this distress ink or this gold ink. Using ink pads like this, and you can get the bigger ink pads too that you put a stamp on. It takes a long time, and you have to be fairly careful and quick that you remove any of the excess on the card before you let it dry. So otherwise you'll end up with some pigment either on the back as a little border on the edge or on the face of the card. And I, in general, find that the alcohol markers work perfectly fine for my aesthetics, so I usually don't dip into the inks, and I save these guys for other kinds of art projects. Okay, so now that I've given you a basic rundown on what edging is, let's get into modifying these decks. So, I'm actually going to start with the Rackham Tarot and the Tarot of the Haunted House. And I'm going to use the same color for both of these decks. This is a dark teal, and I think it is going to complement the card backs, which the edging is more obvious on than you see when you have it from the back and you fan it out like this. It's more obvious what color the edge is than when you have the cards face up and you have them fanned out. So I think that this color is going to complement both of these decks beautifully. We're just going to do a little test here and compare. Tone is very similar. It's not an exact match to this, which is kind of what I was looking for. It's just a touch darker, but I think that's going to work out well. And for this, you see that the borders of the back of the cards are quite a bit lighter, but the teal tone in here matches in with the backdrop of the image that's enclosed in the border quite nicely. And even the fronts of the cards on the Rackham Tarot are desaturated and mostly cool toned and kind of dark, kind of a dark fairy tale deck. And I think that even with the fronts having a lot of this tan creamy color, this old parchment looking feel on the front, I think that this teal is going to contrast them nicely. So let's begin. Okay, so to begin, I am actually going to flip my deck over. The easiest way that I have found to not end up with a big old border around the face of your card is to turn the face away from me. So if I am seeing a part of the card, I'm actually looking at the back. It doesn't really matter too much if there's a slight border around the back of the card, especially if the edges are darker. This is going to come in more to play on these cards, although the face is still much lighter than the back, but I'll have the card turned away from me. And I like to use these chisel tip markers. I find it's a lot easier to control than if you use the brush end. And I will just kind of go in short, light strokes, like so. I'm using a light hand. I'm not pressing very hard. I'm just kind of letting the tip skate, glaze, slide along the edge of the card. If you push down too hard in one spot, then you will end up with streakiness if you are using any color other than black. Too much of the ink will get pushed into the cardstock and it will become somewhat oversaturated. And you'll get a dark spot. It won't be nice and even. All right, friends, so something that I just want to note very quickly is that if you decide to edge with these chisel tip markers, you are going to end up getting these, get it to focus, not really sure if you can see, but you're going to end up getting some grooves in the tip of your marker from the card edges. And what that will do is leave a slight border. I'm not really sure if you can see that. It will leave a slight border around the edge of the back of the card, which you can't see from the front at all. If we look at this card and compare it to this card, oh, come on. Well, my camera doesn't want to cooperate. Okay, there we go. So you can see that there's just the tiniest little bit of border around the edge of this card, which I have edged, and there is not a border here on this one, which I have not done. And as long as they're uniform, this is not going to bother me, especially because it does not show on the front. This is the card that I edged, and this is the card that I have not touched yet. So just a little side note to think about if that's something that that bothers you if you decide to edge a deck of cards. All right, friends, so these two decks are done with one pass each. So the next step is to take a look at the edges carefully and see if there are any spots that we missed. Like in this one, I can see that I obviously missed a couple of pieces on this card, so I'm just going to pull this one out. Give it another quick pass and replace it. Okay, and we'll check again. All right, just got one here on the edge. Just a nice light little swipe to catch that little bit that wasn't covered. One right there. And okay, this side looks good. Let's check this side. Side looks good. And this side looks good. And just one little bit right here on the edge. Okay, so this deck is done. Look at that. We've got like a nice glow from the back with the teal, and from the front as well. It looks nice and finished. Ah, yes, I love it. All right, and you can see, especially on a card like this, where it's nice and light, that we don't really have any bleeding on the front of the card. There is a slight border around the back, but the border, well, the full bleed to the edge of the card is dark enough that it's going to hide any of that. So this one's done. Let's check the other, the Rackham. So this is the one where our edge is going to be a little bit darker than our back face. So let's look for any spots that we missed. Okay, got one right here. Just a light little pass. All right, that looks good. This side looks good. And this side looks good. All right, awesome. Okay, we can see a little teal glow from the fronts and from the backs Oh, that looks nice. And then from the side, we've got this nice dark teal edge. Okay, so since this is a deck edge-a-thon, let's move on to the next deck that I'm going to be working on. So this is the Vintage Wisdom Oracle deck. And it's got all of these beautiful vintage postcard images. And I thought that for this deck, getting a lovely dark purple would be really nice, especially because the box has this play between this blue-green and then this burgundy. I couldn't find a color that quite matched this burgundy, so I'm thinking that a dark purple will tie in really well with the antique look of the cards, especially with ones like this, which have this nice muted violet. I can't find a marker that is close to that shade either. So for this deck, I am planning on combining two different colors. So I have this this pinky red. It's called Red Rose. And just watch. I'm just going to lay some of that down. And then I'm going to go over it with the teal. Okay, so now we have a nice muted purple, and I think that this is going to go lovely with the face and with the backs of the cards to edge these. So I'm going to do my first pass with the, which one do I want to do first? I'm going to do it first with the blue, the dark teal, because I might actually like it as the dark teal for a while, and then once this starts to wear off, then I may go over it with the pink to make it purpley. So I'm going to work on this deck, see how it looks, and then we'll check back in.
Turn this guy over. It's always easier to start on the right side when the deck is facing up, for me at least.
All right, friends, so let's take a look at our edges. Do we see any light spots? This side looks pretty good. This side looks good. This side looks good. And so does this one. Okay, so how does this look with the dark teal edge? I really like the contrast with the brown on the cards. I may trim this deck in the future. It's got pretty thick borders, and this is kind of a meaty deck for my hand size, but I think that I do want to continue on with the purple for now, and if I do trim it in the future, I'll probably leave the edges something like this color, because that's pretty nifty, the color shift there. Okay, so we are going to set this one aside for now and let it dry thoroughly, and I am going to work on the Tarot Z. So I've got Tarot Z here, and for that we are going to use this coffee caramel color, which is like this. I've used this marker to edge a couple of decks now, so because the tip has a bunch of grooves in it, it doesn't make the best markings on the chisel side. Actually, maybe it's drying out a little bit. So I think this is going to be a good color to go with this deck. And the great thing about the markers is that if I don't like it, or if I get bored with it, I can always go darker. So if you're not 100% sure about what you're going to like, start light, you can always go darker. And I know that this deck does look great edged in black, and it will probably eventually get there because Simon from the Hermit's Cave edged his copy in black. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. So let's get going on this coffee color. All right, so let's take a look at these edges. This is a nice color. Goes really well with the backs, huh? That side looks pretty good. I'm not seeing any white showing. That side looks good. And that side looks good. All right, red. So I am happy with how this turned out. Looks good if we fan it this way. Oh yeah, this coffee color just blends in beautifully with the backs. And then from the front, it just gives it this old aged kind of sandy look rather than that stark white that we had before. I'm digging this. One thing that I do notice that you can see, the corners are much darker than the edges of each card. Sometimes this bothers my my perfectionism, but I kind of like it in this deck. It makes it a little bit more worn, and as I use this more, some of this pigment is going to come off and get another chance. The next time that I have to touch this guy up. Now I could go over it with a second coat just to try to get everything more even, but this marker is running out of ink fairly quickly, and I don't think this one needs to be that meticulously gone over. If I was doing black, I might do 2 coats, so it might get 2 coats in the future. I don't know. We'll see. But this guy is done for now. And I am going to revisit this Oracle deck now that this blue has had plenty of time to dry. I'm going to go over it with the pinkish red marker and turn the edges this purple, hopefully. Alright friends, so I got about halfway through adding the pink to create a purple on the edge of this deck and decided to shuffle the cards up and see how they would look together with the blue and the purple tone mixed. And you know what? I really like this. I think it's pretty cool to have a toon tone deck. And I think that's very fitting because the borders around the faces of these cards are several different hues. Even though they're all within the same kind of muted vintagey color family, I like that this darker purple and the dark teal kind of goes together, and it because both of these by themselves are very bright in respect to the colors and tones that are here, but together it makes the edge a little bit more muted, and I think that goes better with the deck, and I like the little bit of variation there. So I think I am just going to leave it like this for now. And, you know, I can always change my mind and change it if I decide to. Anyway, thank you for joining me today on this this little mod adventure, edging adventure. I just want to mention that this entire process with these 4 decks that I showed here took me about 6 hours total to complete. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour, hour and a half sometimes to do every single deck, depending on how carefully and slowly one is edging with the markers. Do I want to say anything about next time? Well, I don't know about next time. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to find out. Maybe I'll do some trimming. I did order a deck, a big ass deck that I have been warned is gonna be like 6.5 inches long, and it has a big ugly, I think it's ugly, border around the face card, but the actual artwork is so beautiful. I bought these cards with the intention of trimming them almost as soon as I get them. So when I get that deck, we're gonna have to trim it and edge it and make it pretty and usable. All right, friends, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.